On the morning of February 2nd, 2024, the sky over Gary, Indiana was the color of old sheet metal. At a sprawling, derelict industrial site on the city's south side, a crew from Great Lakes Environmental Demolition was beginning its fourth week of decommissioning the former Gary Consolidated Steel Plant. The temperature hovered just below freezing. Site foreman Marcus Thorne, a 58-year-old with 30 years in industrial remediation, was reviewing the day's work plan in his mobile office trailer. His crew's task was the systematic dismantling of the primary melt shop complex, a collection of structures built in the 1920s and expanded haphazardly over the following 6 decades. At approximately 9:22 a.m., his radio crackled. "Marcus, you better come to Bay 3, the West Annex wall. Something's not right here." The voice belonged to Javier Ruiz, a master equipment operator. Thorne grabbed his hard hat and coat. Bay 3 housed the oldest furnaces, decommissioned in the late 70s. The attached West Annex was a 2-story brick structure labeled on the original blueprints as Furnace Control and Instrumentation, Bay 3 Alpha. The plan was to use a high-reach excavator to pull down its walls after asbestos abatement was complete. Javier Ruiz stood beside his idling excavator, pointing a gloved hand at a section of the annex's exterior brick wall. About 15 feet off the ground, a section of decorative core-belt brickwork had crumbled away under the gentle probing of the machine's grapple, revealing not the expected hollow interior of a wall, but a solid, flat surface of newer, gray cinder block. "That's an infill," Ruiz said. "They bricked over a hole opening from the outside. And look at the mortar line." Thorne squinted. The mortar sealing the cinder blocks to the original brick was smooth and uniform, a modern Portland cement mix that contrasted sharply with the rough, sandy lime mortar used in the 1920s. This was not a repair. It was a deliberate, later period closure of what had once been a window or a service door. "That wasn't on any of the as-built surveys," Thorne muttered. He ordered Ruiz to shut down and called over the site safety officer, Lydia Chen. Together, they consulted the historical photographs and architectural plans provided by the state's Historical Preservation Office. A photograph from 1958 clearly showed the annex wall with a row of 6 tall, narrow windows with steel frames. In a photo from 1985, only 5 windows were visible. The 6th opening, second from the north end, was gone, replaced by a blank brick panel. The modification was not documented in any work order archives they could access. Given the stringent protocols for disturbing undocumented structural elements, especially in a facility with potential environmental hazards, Thorne made the call. He cordoned off the area and contacted the Gary Police Department's non-emergency line to report a potential structural anomaly requiring investigation before demolition could proceed. It was a routine precaution. He expected a building inspector. What arrived was a coroner's van. The first police officer on scene, Officer Dennis Walsh, arrived at 10:41 a.m. After conferring with Thorne, he used a ladder to reach the infilled section. With a small hammer, he carefully chipped away at the modern mortar around one cinder block. The block was loose, not structurally tied in. He removed it, revealing darkness and a profound, dry cold emanating from within. Shining his flashlight through the hole, he saw a room frozen in time. A thick layer of dust, like gray-black snow, coated every surface control panel, stools, the floor. And in the far corner, barely visible in the shadows, was a humped form, draped in desiccated fabric. Near it, the beam glinted off a pair of eyeglasses. Walsh immediately descended and secured the scene. By 11:30, detectives from the Gary Police Major Crimes Division and a forensic team from the Lake County Coroner's Office were en route. The process of gaining safe access was methodical and slow. The original access door to the annex, a heavy steel fire door on the ground floor, was found to be welded shut from the outside, the welds old and corroded. This forced the forensic team to create a new point of entry. Using a concrete saw with a diamond blade, they carefully cut through the remaining cinder blocks of the infilled window opening. Each block was photographed, catalogued, and removed. The air that wafted out was bone dry and carried a scent of ozone, old metal, and something faintly organic, a HEPA-filtered negative air machine was set up to prevent contamination. Detective Anya Sharma was the first to enter, suited in a white Tyvek coverall, mask, and booties. The control room was a time capsule of mid-century industrial technology. 2 large control desks faced a wall of analog gauges, their glass faces cracked, needles stuck at 0. A schematic of the furnace system, drawn on yellowed linen, was pinned to a corkboard, but the room's layout had been altered. Filing cabinets had been dragged to form a makeshift barrier near the infilled window, and behind this barrier, slumped against the interior brick wall, were the human remains. The skeleton was largely articulated. Seated on the floor with legs drawn up, it was clad in the ghostly remnants of professional clothing, a wool blend skirt, a polyester blouse with a frayed collar, the decayed leather of a single practical pump nearby. A leather handbag rested near the pelvic bones. Most strikingly, around the cervical vertebrae, lay a faded blue lanyard, its plastic end clip holding a laminated identification badge. Detective Sharma did not touch it. She photographed it. The flash illuminated the typed text, Ian Depam, Debaf, Lebar, Elsef Dimanish Amaneshion, Lubanchiera, Imus Pitadan Alambiya for USVN TWO. The photo on the badge showed a woman with light brown hair, a serious expression, and wire-rimmed glasses. The expiration DMB THIRTY Fiast Ninity Igich THRE. Beside the remains was a rectangular object coated in dust. Brushing it gently revealed a hard-sided, black metal 0 Halliburton briefcase. Its aluminum skin pitted but intact. Its combination locks were corroded shut. The scene spoke of a terrifying Ender woman, trapped in a sealed industrial room. Her means of escape, the window bricked over from the outside, the door welded shut. This was not an accident. This was an intimate. The news sent a shockwave through the Gary Police Department. A records search confirmed that Linda Renee Carver, aged 38, had been reported missing from Merrillville, Indiana, on November 8, 1983. Her case file was thin, having stalled within months for lack of evidence or a body. The discovery transformed a 4-decade-old missing persons case into a homicide investigation. The forensic team's work became archaeological. They meticulously sifted the inch-thick dust on the floor, recovering a gold wedding band, a Timex watch with a cracked crystal stopped at 412, a Bic pen, and a half-empty packet of spearmint gum. The briefcase was later opened in the lab using careful drilling of the locks. Inside were inspection notebooks, regulatory manuals, a state-issued 35mm Pentax camera, and, most significantly, a draft citation form for Gary Consolidated Steel. The last entry, dated Navi MBR CVNTH NENATEGHTY THRE, was written in precise, looping handwriting. Bay 3 Alpha Control Room. Observed evidence of deliberate bypass and jumpering of primary furnace over temperature safety cutoffs. Wiring modification is crude but functional. This constitutes a willful, knowing violation of Title 29 Code of Federal Regulations Part 1910.119 and creates an imminent danger of catastrophic vessel failure. Discussed with Site Safety Director V. Serrano at approximately 2:30 p.m., he became argumentative. Stated correction was impossible before quarterly production deadline. I informed him a willful citation with shutdown order was imminent. He left the room. I will complete paperwork and contact regional office for support. The note ended there. The Gary Consolidated Steel Plant was a monument to American industrial might and its painful decline. Founded in 1923, it was a key producer of specialty alloy steels used in machine tools, automotive parts, and later, aerospace components. At its peak in the mid-1960s, it employed over 1,200 people. The primary melt shop, where Bay 3 Alpha was located, was a hellish landscape of roaring flames, molten metal, and constant danger. The control rooms were sanctuaries of relative quiet and clean air, but they were also pressure cookers. The men who worked there, controllers and instrument techs, held lives in their hands. A misread gauge, a delayed reaction, could result in a breakout, a furnace lining failure that could send tons of liquid steel onto the floor in an apocalyptic tide. The early 1980s were a desperate time for Gary Consolidated. Foreign competition, aging equipment, and a severe recession pushed the company to the brink. Layoffs came in waves. The corporate parent, based in Cleveland, demanded increased productivity to meet a crucial contract with a Detroit automaker. The quarterly production deadline in December 1983 was existential. Failure meant bankruptcy. In this atmosphere, safety became a luxury. Maintenance was deferred. Protocols were shortcut. The state's OSHA inspectors, empowered by federal laws passed in the 1970s, were viewed not as protectors, but as existential threats. Their citations cost money the company didn't have. Their shutdown orders could kill the plant. The relationship between management and inspectors was notoriously adversarial. Linda Carver walked into this tinderbox. Linda Renee Carver was born on April 14, 1945, in South Bend, Indiana, the only child of Walter Porter, a machinist, and Margaret Porter, a librarian. She was raised with a deep respect for precision and rules. She stood 5 feet 5 inches tall, with a solid, capable build. Her light brown hair was kept in a neat, chin-length bob. She wore functional clothing, tailored skirt suits from Sears, sturdy low-heeled pumps, and almost always wore her grandmother's pearl stud earrings. Colleagues described her as quiet, fiercely intelligent, and unshakably principled. She earned a degree in mechanical engineering from Purdue University in 1967, one of 6 women in her graduating class in that discipline. She worked for 5 years at a ball bearing manufacturer, where she grew frustrated with the company's disregard for worker safety. In 1974, she joined the Indiana Occupational Safety and Health Administration, seeing it as a way to enact tangible change. She was assigned to the Northwest Indiana District, a territory dominated by steel, oil refineries, and heavy manufacturing. It was a tough beat. She was often the only woman in facilities where language was coarse and attitudes were hostile. She earned a reputation for being thorough, fair, and impossible to intimidate. She and her husband, Robert Bob Carver, a high school biology teacher, lived in a modest brick bungalow at 2147 Lincoln Court in Merrillville. They had married in 1970 and had no children. Their life was orderly and happy. Linda tended a vegetable garden. Bob built model ships. Every Friday night, they had dinner at Mario's Italian restaurant on 61st Avenue, always ordering the chicken parmesan. Linda drove a silver 1981 Dodge Aries K sedan. Her supervisor, Franklin Moss, said of her, "Linda didn't see regulations as red tape. She saw them as lessons written in blood. If she wrote you up, you deserved it, and she could explain exactly why, down to the line item." On Monday, November 7, 1983, Linda Carver left her home at 7:15 a.m. She wore a navy blue skirt suit, a white blouse, and her pearl earrings. Her agenda for the day was a follow-up inspection at Gary Consolidated Steel, focusing on the melt shop. A previous inspection in August had cited 17 serious violations, most relating to furnace safety systems and emergency egress. The correction deadline was November 4th. This was a compliance verification. Bob Carver kissed her goodbye, reminding her they had tickets to the Purdue IU basketball game that weekend. She said she'd be home by 6. She arrived at the plant's security gate at 8:45 a.m., signing the visitor log as L. Carver, IOSHA. She was met by the plant's Director of Safety and Compliance, Vince Serrano. Serrano, 51, was a former steelworker who had risen through the ranks. He was a company loyalist, a man who believed the regulators in Indianapolis didn't understand the realities of running a plant. He was known for his short temper and his ability to smooth over problems. That morning, he escorted Carver into the facility. The initial inspection of the main control room and furnace floor went relatively smoothly. Several violations had been corrected, albeit minimally. Carver took notes and photographs. After lunch around 1:30 p.m., she asked to see the older Bay 3 Alpha control room, which was still in use as a backup station for furnaces 3 and 4. Serrano hesitated, citing confined space entry procedures, but Carver insisted. The room was accessed via a metal grate staircase and a narrow corridor. It was cramped, filled with the hum of old electrical transformers. Carver began her inspection methodically. It was here, behind a loose panel on the main control console, that she found the unauthorized wiring. Thick, copper jumper cables had been installed to bypass the electronic, over-temperature safety cutoffs for both furnaces. This was not a malfunction. It was a deliberate, criminal modification. It allowed the furnaces to operate at temperatures exceeding their design limits, speeding up the melt process, but turning the vessels into potential bombs. Witness accounts from that afternoon are fragmentary, gleaned from 1983 police reports and recent re-interviews of retired workers. David Petrovsky, a furnace controller, recalled seeing Carver and Serrano entering Bay 3 Alpha. He thought nothing of it. An hour later, he saw Serrano exit alone, his face flushed, walking briskly toward the administrative offices. Petrovsky assumed the inspector was still inside. Another worker, a janitor named Earl Jenkins, reported hearing raised voices from the direction of the control room around 2:45 p.m. Though he couldn't make out words over the plant noise, he thought it was just another argument. What is clear from Carver's notes is the sequence. She discovered the bypass. She confronted Serrano in the control room. He argued. She informed him she was issuing a willful citation, which carried a mandatory shutdown order and a fine of up to $10,000 per violation, a death blow for the plant. Serrano left the room, allegedly to get the maintenance foreman. Carver remained, beginning to fill out her citation form. She was still there, writing when someone returned. Linda Carver never left the control room alive. The forensic pathology report, compiled months after the 2024 discovery, painted a stark picture. The remains showed a healed hairline fracture on the left ulna, consistent with a childhood fall from a bicycle, which matched Linda's medical records. The cause of death was determined to be homicidal violence, a fracture of the left superior cornu of the hyoid bone, strongly indicative of manual strangulation. There were no defensive wounds on the skeletal hands. The positioning suggested she may have been seated at the control desk when she was attacked from behind or the side. Crucially, analysis of the particulate matter embedded in the nasal sinus bones and trachea matched the unique elemental signature of the dust inside Bay 3 Alpha, a specific blend of coal coke, iron oxide, and silica. She had breathed her last breaths in that room. She had not been moved post-mortem. After her death, a chillingly practical cover-up began. The killer, or killers, were now faced with a body in an active industrial plant. Removal was too risky. Concealment was the only option. The control room itself offered a solution. It was already isolated. The window provided access to an exterior brick wall. The original door could be sealed. Sometime after the end of the day shift, likely under cover of night, someone with knowledge of masonry and access to materials bricked over the window from the outside. They used cinder blocks and modern mortar, materials readily available in the plant's maintenance yard. They then welded the steel access door shut from the corridor side, creating a nearly perfect tomb. Linda Carver, her briefcase, and her damning citation were sealed inside. The next step was to manage her disappearance. Her silver Dodge Aries was still in the visitor lot. Sometime between November 7th and 8th, it was driven away. It was found 3 days later, on November 10th, in the long-term parking lot of the Gary Chicago International Airport, nearly 10 miles from the plant. The keys were not in it. There was no sign of a struggle. This staging was designed to suggest she had chosen to vanish, a theory the original investigators initially pursued. Bob Carver reported her missing on the evening of the 8th, after she failed to come home and didn't call. The Merrillville police, upon learning her car was at the airport, treated it as a probable voluntary missing persons case for the first critical 48 hours. The original investigation, led by Gary Police Detective Sergeant Martin Royce, was hamstrung from the start. Royce, a competent but overworked detective, interviewed Vincent Serrano on November 9th. Serrano was calm, cooperative. He stated he had left Linda Carver in the Bay 3 Alpha control room around 2:45 p.m. to fetch the maintenance foreman. When he returned 15 minutes later, she was gone. He assumed she had finished her inspection and left the plant. He claimed he walked to the parking lot and saw her car was gone. He offered the theory that perhaps she had personal problems. Royce found the plant a forbidding place to investigate. Workers were close-mouthed, loyal to the company that provided their paychecks in a dying town. Management, from plant manager Arthur Finch down, provided polite but limited cooperation. A cursory search of the plant was conducted, but no one thought to examine a sealed-off control room that appeared, from the outside, to be just another part of the decaying facility. The welded door was noted, but explained as a standard safety procedure for a decommissioned space. Without a body, without evidence of foul play at the airport, the case lost momentum. By January 1984, it was effectively cold. Royce retired in 1992, taking his unresolved doubts with him. The 2024 investigation, led by Detective Anya Sharma of the Cold Case Unit, operated with the stark advantage of the discovered remains and modern forensic techniques. The case was now unequivocally a homicide. The target was Vincent Serrano, still alive at 83, living in a retirement community in Scottsdale, Arizona. Sharma and a federal agent from the Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General traveled to interview him. Serrano, represented by a lawyer, repeated his 1983 story with robotic consistency. Confronted with the physical evidence, the body in the room, he claimed she left. The citation citing his argumentative behavior, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. He was a frail old man in a cardigan, but his eyes held a defiant, steely opacity. Without a direct forensic link like DNA or an eyewitness, prosecutors faced the difficult reality that a jury might see a vulnerable elderly man, not the powerful, cornered safety director of 1983. Sharma's team turned to the forensic archaeology of the scene and a deep dive into plant records. They located the work order for the sealing of obsolete control room window, Bay 3 Alpha. It was dated January 15, 1984, and authorized by plant manager Arthur Finch. The contractor listed was Midwest Brickwork, Incorporated. That company's records, recovered from a defunct storage unit, showed the job was a cash payment of $500, requested by V. Serrano GCS Safety. The bricklayer who performed the work, a man named Raymond Ray Dobbs, was deceased, but his widow shared that her husband had come home that night in January '84 unusually quiet. He said only that it was a weird job, a rush thing, sealing up a room from the outside in the middle of the night. Felt wrong. He had died in a construction accident in 1991. The team also traced the likely movement of Carver's car. A re-examination of the 1983 airport parking lot attendant's log showed a vehicle matching her Dodge's description being entered at 11:14 p.m. on November 7th by a driver who paid cash for a week. The attendant's description of the driver was vague: white male, medium build, hat. Sharma theorized it was either Serrano or, more likely, a subordinate he coerced or bribed. The plant's head of security in 1983, a man named Carl Dobson, had died in 2005. The trail for the car staging ended there. The historical deep dive revealed the immense pressure on Gary Consolidated Steel in late 1983. Corporate memos spoke of the absolute necessity of meeting the December quarterly production targets for the Chrysler contract. A memo from the corporate safety director, dated October 31st, 1983, warned of potentially catastrophic risks if furnace over temperature protocols were not strictly followed. A handwritten note in the margin, later identified by a former secretary as belonging to Arthur Finch, read, "Vince handled this. We cannot stop." The bypass wiring found by Carver was the literal manifestation of that pressure. She wasn't just citing a violation. She was uncovering the criminal negligence that management had authorized to save the plant. In the end, the most plausible resolution is not a courtroom verdict, but a historical reconstruction. On the afternoon of November 7th, 1983, in the cramped, humming control room of Bay 3 Alpha, Vincent Serrano faced the end of his world. The stubborn, meticulous inspector in front of him held the power to shutter the plant, end hundreds of jobs, and expose him and his superiors to criminal prosecution for willful endangerment. A confrontation escalated. In a surge of panic and rage, he strangled Linda Carver. The act was likely not premeditated, but its aftermath was coldly calculated. He enlisted at least one other person, perhaps the maintenance foreman or a security guard, to help seal the tomb and move the car. He used his authority and the pervasive fear of the plant's collapse to ensure silence. The brick wall went up. The door was welded. The car was taken to the airport. He then navigated the police investigation, relying on the plant's insular culture and the red herring of the abandoned vehicle. He retired comfortably in 1989. 2 years before the plant finally closed for good in 1991. For Bob Carver, the call from Detective Sharma in February 2024 ended 41 years of agonizing uncertainty. He had never moved from the Lincoln courthouse. He had kept Linda's garden going. He told reporters, "I always knew, in my heart, she would never just leave. She wasn't a quitter. To find her like that, it's a horror. But at least she's home now." Linda Carver's identified remains were cremated. On a sunny day in May 2024, Bob Carver, now 81, scattered her ashes in the perennial garden she had loved, beside her favorite peonies. A simple stone plaque reads, "Linda Carver, beloved wife, she sought only justice." The Gary Consolidated Steel site is now a graded, empty lot awaiting redevelopment. The control panel from Bay 3 Alpha and Linda Carver's badge are in the evidence locker of the Lake County Prosecutor's Office. The citation she was writing, preserved in a plastic sleeve, is a stark exhibit. Vincent Serrano was never charged. He lives under the Arizona sun. The Lake County prosecutor issued a statement saying, "While we are confident we know what happened to Linda Carver, the death of key witnesses and the passage of time have precluded the possibility of obtaining a criminal conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. The file remains open, awaiting any new evidence." The story of Linda Carver is a ghost story of the industrial age. It is not about specters, but about silence, the silence of a sealed room, the silence of a complicit community, the silence of decades. Her tomb was not in a cemetery, but in the very infrastructure of progress she was tasked with safeguarding. She vanished into the architecture of the American Rust Belt, only to be returned by its demolition. Her case is a reminder that some truths are not buried in shallow graves in dark woods, but locked away in plain sight behind brick and mortar and a conspiracy of mundane, terrible necessity. The furnaces of Bay 3 are silent forever, but the echo of what happened in their control room on a November afternoon in 1983 is a cold, persistent draft that time has finally let in.